Welcome back to Career Tea. Today's guest has cracked the code on the prestigious pivot. From community college at San Antonio College to UC Berkeley, and then an absolute tear through internships at PwC, Uber, and Disney before landing as a financial analyst at the data giant Snowflake. On top of the 9 to 5, he's built a large community with over 500,000 impressions on TikTok and YouTube, helping students land their own dream roles. Adam Ramirez is here with us today. Adam, welcome to Career Tea.
Happy to be here, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. I'm so excited to have you here, learn a little bit about your path, your career journey, and take as much advice from you as possible. So, Adam, looking at your LinkedIn starting out, it looks absolutely like a highlight reel. UC Berkeley, Disney, Uber, Snowflake. I know you have a video. It's about the brutal reality of transferring schools, transferring from community college to Berkeley. You mentioned how that when you started at a community college, you were a top student. Going to a prestigious school like Berkeley, you feel like now you're in the middle of the pack. How does that affect recruiting, and how does it affect you going from, again, a community college to a prestigious college? Does it make you doubt that you could land big opportunities, or does it just light a fire under you and you're like, no, I got this?
Definitely. And I feel like people might react to it a bit differently. And I would say, I would describe it as a dogfight. You're in an environment with very talented, very smart individuals. I remember my first few conversations at UC Berkeley, walking around the halls, going to my first class in Haas, was that people were just talking about the internships that they had, Apple, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. That summer, I had just spent the entire summer just being a server at my local water park. So there's different ways to react to it, but I think personally for me, it kind of just lit that fire that you mentioned to kind of just try to figure things out of, okay, I need to get a resume. Let's go to the career center. Okay, let's figure out where do I apply to internships. So it went from there of just trying to figure out how do I also compete with my peers. It kind of just started from there, from like a perspective of wanting to compete with my peers to essentially just be on their level as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And every time I think back, I had a couple friends that went the same route. They went to community college and then they went to Ivy League school. When I think back, I'm like, damn, I would have done that, but I never really knew that that was kind of a path. I learned about this like way later on, right? Like nobody told me, hey, that you should do this. Back then, I feel like it might have been looked down upon to go to community college, right? But now when you're looking back, you're like, wow, that would have been such a smart move. So how was it for you? How did you plan that? Was that your plan from the get-go to, I'm gonna go to community college for 2 years, work my butt off and become top student, go to a top prestigious Ivy League school? Or was it during the community college years that you kind of learned about that and you're like, I'm going to make this pivot?
Definitely, and that's a great question. First up, was not planned. I would say I was a good student in high school, but again, just like very middle of the pack. I would say my focus was like more on like sports and trying to go D1. So I would say the effect of just like getting denied by many schools was kind of fueled that path of, okay, maybe we should go to community college. And like what you said, it still is somewhat looked down upon. I remember a lot of people when I was at my 2 years at community college told them that I went to community college, and you hear the reaction in their voices. But it is a great path. It's a path that I recommend to everybody. I know my kids, they're probably going to go down this path as well because it's just so competitive these days. You have kids on LinkedIn like trying to be startup founders. So it just, the bar is just going up and up. So it's a great
Yeah,
route. And or go ahead.
no, I was gonna say you probably saved a lot of money as well, and that's another aspect that I feel like people look at.
Definitely. Having to not pay that much in student loans definitely helps me out early on in my career where I'm trying to invest a lot of money as well into the stock market. So pays a lot of dividends.
Yeah. Would you say that now that I guess it is becoming more common for students to take that community college route to be able to get into some of these Ivy League schools where maybe they wouldn't have gotten in straight out of high school? Do you think that professors are aware of that? Do you think that they're aware of that is a path that students take? And do you think they might teach in a way to kind of position students for that type of pivot in school?
Yeah, professors as in, like, professors at those Ivy League schools or professors at, like, a community college or maybe even teachers
At
at
the
high
at
school?
the community colleges. Yeah, at the community colleges, like, are they aware? How do they approach, like, I feel like now that it's becoming more common, I just wanna know what the atmosphere is, right? Are they trying to prep students to make those pivots, right? Are they aware that a lot of students go there with that goal of 2 years here and then graduating to go to Ivy League school?
Definitely, I would say, like, for professors right now at community college, the goal that they know that their students should be shooting for is doing 2 years and transferring out. So, even for, like, business-focused classes like accounting, a lot of the professors, they were former, like, Big 4 employees. So, they actually help them not only try to let them transfer out, but also giving them great career advice as well.
If there is, a lot of students similar in your shoe being at community colleges and let's say they've gone to a prestigious Ivy League school, so they have 2 years there, 2 years here, and they're applying to places, they're getting interviews, and their resumes are against resumes of students that have been at that Ivy League school for 4 years. How do you suggest they pitch that as a strength rather than a detour?
Yeah, I would say lean into your experience, your difficulties that you had to go through, because going through community college, it builds a lot of you go through a lot of adversity. So lean in on your story, know your story well, and be able to sell it well. I would say that's your advantage. Also, while at community college, try to get internships as well. I know the focus is just transferring out, but you could do an internship at community college. So you don't have to be at a disadvantage when you go into whatever school that you transfer to. That's something I always try to tell community college students, like, yes, focus on transferring out, but you also have what you want to do after college that you should be focused on.
I know that you've also talked about, a lot of schools, a lot of these prestigious Ivy League schools, they have a lot of clubs that may be connected to different consulting firms or tech companies, right? And some of these clubs are able to hand projects to students. Maybe some of these non-target schools or community colleges, students don't have access to those clubs and be able to have access to those type of projects. What's your suggestion for those students to be able to compete essentially with, let's say, Berkeley students who have a Google project handed to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I always tell people, because I actually get asked this question, how do you stand out at a community college? One way is just to create your own clubs. There's a lack of clubs at community colleges that you could easily create. Create your own consulting club, create an investment banking club, a consulting club. You could easily do that at community college. It's just that nobody wants to do it. It's difficult. So if you could create something from 0 to 1, that looks great on applications to your next university and also looks great on applications to internships.
Yeah, absolutely. And that probably creates that leadership, role for yourself, creates connections with companies as well. That's a great advice. And this kind of leads to my next question. I know sometimes being at, let's say, UC Berkeley, it could be very competitive to get into some of these clubs, or maybe sometimes even discriminate against transfer students, right? Maybe they wouldn't want to allow those students in. So, what happens to a student if they can't get in? And maybe you might say that they should go and create their own club, which might be even harder at a bigger school. But if they are locked out, what's your advice there for them?
Yeah, and it's truly one of the downsides of being a transfer student. You're not seen one to one, to be quite frank, especially at these very prestigious universities. So, how do you stand out? What's the next path? Well, just getting internship experience. Getting that experience is way better than a club experience. Once you finally get that experience, that's what you need. So, how can you do that? And something that I personally did was doing an externship. So, it's through a company called Extern. They were actually in YC Combinator, and you're able to connect with great companies like Snapchat, with BeReal, with TikTok, and do projects with them that you could put on your resume. So it's essentially like getting that club experience at a great, prestigious club, but doing it your own path. So I highly recommend looking into Extern.
How hard is it to land those projects? Is it like a job where you apply and you have to interview? How competitive is it?
Yeah, the process with Extern, so it's a subscription base, so it's $10 and you have access to the entire catalogs of externships, and they range from different careers in like product management, software engineering, finance focused. So you could get a ton of experience within like a month. You could just speed run through all those externships and have great names. Before it used to be you had to like interview for them. That's how I did it. But now they switched their business model a bit. So now anybody could do these externships for $10 a month, which, people might say, oh, you're paying for a job. Oh, that's an investment to get your next entry level job that will pay you more than $10.
Yeah, absolutely. In a world where everything costs some sort of money, paying $10 for a great experience is probably very worth it. Now, we're going to dive into your internships down in a little bit, but did any of your internships come from extern?
Yeah, so one of them was with Credera Consulting. And so yes, one of them was through extern, and I would say it was the catalyst into the other internships I ended up getting because one, it was a consulting, like also like a data focused externship. And it's hard these days to, at least for like field that I'm in for like financial analysis, to not be involved with data. So that was kind of like my bread and butter for all my data questions that I ended up getting asked in these.
Before I ask you more questions about your internships and a few more questions on extern, I want to kind of touch on what you studied in community college before we moving on to your Berkeley experiences. What was your major at your community college? And then what did you decide to take on as an undergrad at UC Berkeley once you transferred? And what was the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, so I studied finance and accounting at community college, and I knew that like that was kind of like where I wanted to take my career into finance. But when I transferred into UC Berkeley, I actually majored in political economy. So not one for one with finance and accounting, but I knew that being at Berkeley with its reputation of just like great professors, I knew I wanted to learn more than just your typical finance major at Haas or economics. I wanted to learn more, something a bit more diverse. So that was kind of my thought process with my majoring in political economy. But I knew because of that, I could still like do finance related careers because I already took accounting classes in community college. So that was kind of my game plan. Like I could still do this career of finance because I know how to leverage the classes that I've already taken.
It makes sense completely the path that you took, and that was a plan of yours. But I always ask my guests this that if you could go back with what you know now, with the experience you've gone through, would you still choose the major that you chose of political economy?
Yeah, I would still major in political economy, but actually would be a double major. I would either add on computer science or data science. I feel like nowadays everybody's expected to be like a Swiss Army knife. So at least at my company, that's kind of the expectation. So just having that technical background will just honestly be so helpful in my career right now. So I would definitely add on the either like a CS major or data science major.
And I guess that kind of leads to my next topic. And we already talked about extern, but if somebody's looking to build on to those small, skill sets or niche areas of skills, I guess extern would be a great place since you said they focus on doing short-term projects. Which leads me to my next question that since you've been there for somebody who's already gone through the extern program, landed an internship from it, would you say that recruiters value those remote 4 to 6 week internships or externships and projects? Do they value it as much as a traditional 10, 15-week summer internship that we're used to hearing about?
Yeah, and I feel like we're still in the early innings of knowing that. Extern is still a relatively like new company. When I had on my resume that it was an externship, recruiters thought it was like a spelling mistake and they thought I did an internship. But as like more and more people like start doing externships, I think people are going to start realizing, okay, this is a project. And I still think it's going to be beneficial because people, at least recruiters, have a cognitive bias. So if you have a great name on your resume, okay, they're probably going to think, okay, this is a good candidate. And all the externships through extern, they're with great companies. So if you could build that up, build some credibility with some great names, I still think it's very helpful.
What was, you mentioned that you participated through the extern and you got your first internship through it. Other than landing that internship, what did you learn from, I guess, those projects that you partake in?
Man, it was like maybe like 4 years ago, but so the projects through extern, they're almost like self-managed. They'll give you the guidelines, what you're trying to go for, but you have a lot of autonomy in those projects, whether you want to go above and beyond and have a great project or kind of just do the minimum and just kind of slap it on your resume. So just having that autonomy, having that ownership, I think gives you the opportunity to grow and just go above and beyond. Because a lot of things in your career, you might get asked like, this is where you should be. But if you're consistently up here, then th- that only builds a great habit for you to have in your career.
After you get that, internship on your resume, now you're building some momentum. How did you land your next internship, which I believe it was at PwC, correct?
Correct. And I actually landed my PwC internship before getting my externship. So landed the PwC first, and then I was so hungry to get other experiences on my resume because, to be quite frank, I still had DoorDash driver on my resume, server on my resume, which is not bad, but I wanted something more, something that builds a bit more credibility. So landing my internship with PwC, the experience that actually helped me the most was being a volunteer tax assistant. I did this while in high school. It was part of my class. Like I didn't realize like how like instrumental this class was going to be, but it ended up being the reason I would say that I landed an interview with PwC and then ultimately ended up landing my full-time offer.
PwC being one of the big four, it's a huge name. A lot of students think of PwC as like a safe haven. Like you land PwC, as you mentioned, get that name on your resume, can take you places. Do you think that that name on your resume was essentially the key that opened doors to your other experiences at Uber and Disney? Or do you think you could have landed them without PwC's big four pedigree?
Yeah, having the PwC name on my resume was definitely a catalyst in all my interviews for landing those internship offers because it just somehow turned out that my Uber, my Disney, my interviewers there, they all came from the Big Four and specifically PwC. So once you build that commonality with your interviewer, it helps out a lot. Obviously, there's different ways to build commonality, but just having it be through a former employer helps out a lot. So I definitely would say it was a large impact in being able to get these other offers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we kind of go over your Uber and Disney experiences and how you got those, do you remember at a high level what your experience was like at PwC? If there's a student listening right now and they're debating between PwC and another big four, another company, would you suggest to them that that's a route that they should take? Would you take that again? And what are the pros and cons?
Yeah, I interned at PwC in 2021, so definitely was a while ago. I'm pretty old now. But my experience at PwC, it was honestly a very positive experience. I when I look back on it, I think of highlights of going to like a bowling alley for an intern event. I remember going to like Disney. They got us tickets for Disneyland and having an unlimited tab at like the happy hour bar that we were at. So they're all fond memories. I would say like they're trying to sell you on the experience of the Big Four. Yes, you will learn great things, but you also have to understand if you're a summer intern, that's the slow season. That's when everybody's traveling. There's also it's only like a 7-week internship too because they have like 1 week now that they closed down the firm. So in 7 weeks, probably even less because you had like your first 2 weeks are like training and onboarding. You still learn great things. I feel like the mentorship is the biggest thing of just like knowing like, okay, this is like how an associate conducts themselves. So that was I would say that that was the biggest takeaway, the mentorship from those internships. And also it was just fun as well to like meet other interns, to go to these great events. So it's a lot, it's something to look forward to.
Definitely doesn't seem as overwhelming as somebody might think as a big four. But it sounds like, those connections that you create are definitely one of the more important things, as well as, the skills and the mentorship that you'll gain.
Definitely.
Now, from PwC internship, your next internship was strategic finance at Uber. Uber, one of the biggest companies, right? And the role is one of the most gatekept roles in tech. A lot of people want to get into that role. At a high level, tell me, how did you, right, a transfer student from community college to Berkeley, beat out all of those Ivy League kids who had been groomed for such role for 4 years? How did you beat them for this role? Was it sending cold emails? Was it networking, reaching out, or was it referrals, or did you just out hustle them in your case study?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that was the difference maker for landing this internship, and I ended up interning with people from great schools like Harvard, a lot of UC Berkeley, UCLA. So it definitely was a very great pedigree at that internship. But the biggest thing that helped me stand out was leaning into my network, asking for help. Hey, can you look over my resume? Hey, can we do mock interviews? Like, hey, like I have this take home assignment. Like, can you like look over this? Which is, it's totally okay to lean it to ask for help. So I would say that that was the biggest difference maker from year one to year two for recruiting, leaning into the people that I know, actually like asking for help.
Did it get easier, going from from year one to year two, since you kind of, settled in a little bit more, maybe got a little bit more comfortable in your surroundings, in your atmosphere, in your groups?
Yeah, I would say my answers were a lot more polished going into year two. Year one, I was very unsure of like when should I start applying to internships. Also, just kind of just being very rough in my interviews to say the least. So year two felt like I knew what was going on. Also, I was able to lean into my experiences too at PwC at doing my externship. So I had real things to talk about rather than something maybe I did and high school, like through the VITA program that I did, or maybe working as like a server. So I had real tangible things to talk about, and I think that's something that really helped me stand out.
Do you remember what the Uber interview process was like?
Yeah, I think it was like 3 rounds. So recruiter call, second round was I think a call with 2 associates, and then the last round was a case interview, walk through your case interview. And I remember being so nervous for all these interviews, but I would say just like preparation is really what led the way, because once you have you could almost kind of like expect certain questions to be asked. So once you have those questions down to a T and you could kind of almost go on autopilot, helps you out so much.
Now, at a high level, what was your day to day like at Uber?
Yeah, so I had an intern project at Uber. So I was responsible for building 2 dashboards. One was, and for context, I was on the Uber ads business when we were barely launching out. They had an aggressive goal of reaching 1 billion in revenue within like their first year or two of launching. So we were kind of in charge of, or I was in charge of creating an operating expense dashboard to kind of see like where are our margins at. And then secondly, for that organization, I built a headcount dashboard as well to track our headcount. So those were my main projects at Uber. Again, it's like a 12-week internship. It goes by very fast. Like 12 weeks in corporate life, that goes by very fast. So that was my day to day, just kind of working on these projects. And then ultimately we had a presentation to our SVP of Uber Eats. So that was exciting to be able to get that exposure and being able to kind of really try to tone or kind of craft my presentation skills, which is very important in corporate.
At this point that you've gotten PwC under your belt, you've gotten Uber under your belt, and you're only about a year, 2 years into your professional career, you got two giant names. You decide to make a move to Disney. Tell me what was the decision making? What was the thought process before making that move? I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of young professionals, if they already had a Big Four experience, now they're at Uber, they might be thinking, I'm gonna stay here for a while. I'm gonna stay here. But you were still hungry. You were still, chasing. You're like, no, I want to go to that next thing. What was your thought process there, and how did you make that happen to be able to get an opportunity at Disney?
And my thought process was I wanted to stay prudent. I saw the narrative. People do 2 years either in investment banking, consulting, PwC, whatever the case. They do 2 years and maybe they end up not liking it. So I really wanted to lean into these internship experience, and they were all over the board. They were doing audit, they were doing strategic finance, they were doing product strategy with Disney. So they were completely very different skill sets that I was leaning into, but it allowed me to really understand what do I want to do. And it kind of answered that as well, like going from product strategy back into tech finance. I understood, okay, this is where I want to be. This is where I could develop my career for the next 5 to 10 years without having to make that expensive pivot through an MBA. So I was really just trying to be prudent. I was not trying to prestige horror or anything. I was just trying to figure out what do I actually want to do with my career.
How did you, I guess, land that opportunity at Disney? Did you have, was it easy? Did you just apply? Was it through networking? There might be a student out there right now thinking about, I want to get into some product strategy at Disney as well. That sounds good. But what advice do you have for them to go about it to be able to have a real shot at that?
Yeah, the process for Disney internships is pretty unique. So most times when you see a job listing, they're actually only hiring for one role rather than maybe like a PwC when they're trying to recruit for 100 interns. So when it only has one role, you're competing it against with a lot of people. So for myself, and this is kind of just like how I went about it, once I have like those great names of Uber, PwC on my resume, I didn't really have to do too much networking because my resume typically it was strong against other candidates. But in the process, in the interview period, you're competing against not only with yourself, but you're competing against other people interviewing. So although you might get a question asked like, "What is your favorite Disney character?" You want to make sure that you're not only giving a good answer, but giving the best answer. So I would say if you're someone that's looking for a Disney internship, make sure that you have your unique story lined up and kind of like curate that to the role and also to like your love for Disney as well.
Now you're about to graduate, right? You've got PwC audit, Uber finance, Disney strategy under your belt. Before we move on about, you after graduating and landing your first full-time role, rank those three, if you can rank those three experiences for you based on culture, best balance. I know you didn't work there full time, but during those limited times that you had there, who was the most intense? Which one did you enjoy the most? Which one would you go back to again?
Yeah, the most intense I would say was Uber. Working with like my team that I worked on was extremely smart, former consultants, former engineers. A lot of the team had MBAs. So I feel like during that experience, not only was it intense, but I still leaned back and remember the great mentorship that I had. Remember my manager specifically one specific moment where he paused in a meeting for he got asked a question and he paused for like 5 seconds. It was so like awkward in the meeting room, but those pauses are so powerful and nobody will teach you that. But just being able to see that, it's done a lot for my career, I would say, and just like how I try to communicate it as well. So Uber, number one, Disney, having a free like annual pass whenever you want to go is pretty cool. And just like living like next to the campus, like I was based out of Florida, so Disney World, that's just a cool experience. And I was there for maybe like I believe 6 months, 3 months. So it was good to like integrate with the team as well. And then I would say like PwC last, not to say that it wasn't a good internship, but it was also like a long time ago. Like I mean, like recency bias, I think wins out.
All right. Now, before we move to your professional career, we've been talking about landing these internships. These are some very high prestigious level internships you've landed. And I know that you do work and you do help students with resumes and resume templates. So I want to ask you a question about if you were to give one suggestion to a student who's trying to land these type of internships, right? But they know that the resume might be lacking or might not be at a level to be competing with top students. How do you think what fixes do you think they can make at a high level to their resume just starting out that would take it from one level to the next level?
Yeah, and I would say any experience is a great experience. Like you could have a DoorDash driver being a DoorDash driver on your resume and make it sound amazing. Some things that like the Google XYZ method, if you don't know it, look it up. But that's kind of the format that you want to craft your resume bullets. And you want to add TLDR for Google XYZ method, add a ton of metrics. Even if you have to estimate it, like add that in. It's a huge eye catcher for recruiters and it makes any experience look very impressive. So look this up, Google XYZ method. You're welcome.
I'm sure a lot of students will, look that up. Now you're graduating from school. You've essentially paved the perfect path for yourself and you want to land your first full-time role. Tell me about how you went about landing at Snowflake. Was that your target company? The role that you have at Snowflake, was that kind of what you were targeting to get into? How did you go about it?
Yeah, so it was actually a cold application to Snowflake. I think for the year that I applied at the cohort that they recruited, they had over 1,000 applications that applied. They opened the job application on a Friday. By Monday, they already had 1,000. So it was a very competitive job market, and it still is. But I would say, how do you like, or like, how do you stand out? Like, why Snowflake as well? Starting with the why Snowflake, like, it was a very complex business model. Like, I think that's something that drawed me to it, where it's like you're working on a company that's not on subscription, it's based on usage. I thought that was very interesting. So that's what kind of drawed me to Snowflake. Of course, it doesn't get as much like glamour as like saying that you work at an Uber, because everybody knows what Uber is. I kind of have to explain what Snowflake is. But it's been a great experience to kind of go through a business that's very complex. And then, like, how do you stand out? Like, if I was, 2 years ago trying to apply again, it it's really a numbers game. And there's, of course, ways to improve your odds, but you have to understand is that you're gonna get rejected by a ton of companies. Even, like, with the resume that I had, I was getting rejected maybe, like 4 out of 10 times. So you really have to just keep your head up high, maintain your confidence, and it'll eventually work out if you're consistent, if you have the discipline, if you're doing all the things right. So it is a competitive job market, but it typically will work out.
You talk about not giving up and it's a numbers game and continue applying. I've heard here and there, a lot of people will be applying to, let's say, 20 jobs, and for each job, they'll be adjusting the resume based on that job description. Do you suggest that type of method of creating essentially a custom resume for every job you apply to? Is that what you did, or you make one good resume with all the skills that you have and you just use that one resume? What type of method do you use and would you suggest?
I believe tailoring your resume does have some value to it, but when you're applying at scale, you have to have some like trade-offs. So for myself, like when I was trying to apply for like say like I was also into when I was like interested in product strategy, I had my product strategy internship resume. But when I was trying to apply for like these finance rotation programs, I also had my tailored financial rotation program resume. And although these I had similar experiences on them, the bullet points might look a bit different because I'm trying to tailor it to that position. So yes, you can create these different resumes. I would say the biggest thing that like might stand out, and it's like a small detail, but when you apply to a company, adding that company's name to the resume file name, it helps out. It's a small little thing, but it might help out. That it shows that you're tailoring your resume to this position, and it only looks good. And it's like those small cognitive biases that a recruiter or whoever's looking at your resume might pick up and say like, okay, like this is someone that's actually interested in the role. They're not just like sending off their application to anything that pops up on LinkedIn.
So it's like those small details that you would think that they won't notice, but it's probably no one else is doing it. So if they do notice it, you'll be like one of the few, if not the only one. Can you tell me a little bit about, I'm also, very new and recently familiar with Snowflake. So for those that are learning about Snowflake, can you just give a quick, brief overview of what Snowflake does and what you do on your day-to-day role there?
So Snowflake's a data warehouse company, so we store all your data, and to make it useful, we add layers of like compute as well. Think of like SQL. We have other tools that we recently released, like a coding agent tool. Think of Snowflake as using your data and making it useful at a very high level. And what do I do at Snowflake? I'm actually a financial analyst on the team, or on the ET team. So that's essentially your typical IT. So think of like how a company maintains its forecast for laptops, for all its software spend that it might like have for its company. Other line items like internal cloud spend, how we use our own product a lot actually at Snowflake, and that could be pretty costly. But there's a lot of different line items that I look at, but at like a high level, it's kind of just like reallocating dollars, and it's also forecasting as well.
When I think about like the internships that you did and essentially choosing to go towards Snowflake versus, let's say, Disney, would you say that because Snowflake is a big player in the data and potentially AI moving towards that space, would you say that was a reason for you to make that kind of decision to go for Snowflake versus going back to Disney?
Yeah, the industry played a huge impact on my decision where I wanted to start my career. So Disney is actually a very slow moving dinosaur, I would say. Although you might have great ideas that you want to implement, people aren't very on board to put those things into effect because people would just want to do the things that have been tried and true. Rather than at Snowflake, it's kind of like a system where it's like you're breaking glass, you're trying to figure things that will work, so it's a lot fast moving. It's a completely different environment. So I would say like there was more learning to be done at a company like Snowflake rather than like a Disney. Although like working there was great people at Disney, not to say that you won't learn a lot, but it's a completely different environment.
I've seen some of your videos where you talk about how important it is to be immersed in AI and being AI native and how it's becoming a mandatory requirement now. If I'm a student right now, let's say in finance or accounting, where I one of my majors was accounting, and at the time too, I mean, I'm not sure if AI was around. I mean, maybe it was around and we didn't really hear about it. But if there's a finance student and they're not necessarily using AI in any of their workflows, any of their work right now, would you say that they're, becoming already kind of obsolete, they're lacking behind? And what suggestion would you have for them? Where do they get started with using AI or adding AI skills to their toolkit once they graduate?
Definitely. And I think this year is going to be the inflection point where you either are a first mover in being AI native or you're going to be left behind against your competition that are using AI. So for like a student trying to get involved, I would say just the small things, the small wins at first, using Gemini to like ask it questions, maybe like adding like a automated reminder when you have an assignment, so just trying to figure out like what will make my life easier because at its core, people want to like glamorize AI, but what is it actually doing? What is the incremental value that it's giving? And for us, or how I'm looking at it, I want to figure out how is it going to save me time? How is it going to make my life easier? So kind of just look at it through the lens of that point of like, how can I save time throughout my day? Okay, let me try to figure that out with AI. So what and that might look different. You might have to use different tools. You might have to experiment, but everybody is right now. There's a ton of AI tools and you have to just figure out what's going to work best for your workflow.
So essentially, save time for yourself, become more efficient. That way, you're saving time for your company, making them more efficient.
Exactly.
You have a background in accounting, finance, and I know there could be students right now that are in that space and they're on that path. And one of the major paths or more popular paths that they go down on is a CPA route. I'm not sure if you have had your CPA. I don't think you've gotten your CPA, but I want to know if you have any outlook on going to get your CPA, pros and cons, and if that is something that you might consider down the line, in your career.
If you're an want to go down the accounting career, you have to get your CPA. It's going to be very competitive. The implications of AI, we still don't know exactly what that might look like, but you have to plan for the worst case scenario. And in a scenario where there's just less accounting jobs, only the CPAs are going to get hired. So plan on getting your CPA. For myself, I'm actually going back to community college. I'm enrolled in a class at community college because I need 4 more units to be CPA eligible. So I'm currently doing that right now. I think I need like 2 more months on the class to finish that up so I could start studying for my CPA. So hopefully by the end of the year, I will have that comma plus 3 letters at the end of my name.
Nice. So you do want to go and get your CPA eventually, right? And I guess tell us a little bit about if the students right now listening, what's that process like? You're also saying that you're going back to community college to get those few credits, right? For those that might be wondering, like, why are you going back? Why can I get all those credits in undergrad? Or, is that not enough? Do I have to have additional hours or additional credits after 4 years of school? How does that work?
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to CPA eligibility, and it varies state by state. But at least for California, you need 24 units of accounting units and also 24 units of business focused units, and also your bachelor's degree as well. So I'm actually missing 4 accounting units, unfortunately. So I'm going back to community college to do that. That's the most cost effective way. So yeah, there's a plethora of ways to get those units, and typically if you do an accounting major, you'll reach that. But I guess I did not, so I back at community college.
If somebody wants to stay in the accounting field, but they don't want to go get their CPA, what are some type of jobs and roles that kind of falls in that category that if you don't have your CPA, you can still be in the accounting field?
Yeah, well, you could still be in Big Four and not have your CPA. I think it's only a requirement that you click the box and say that you plan to get your CPA, but you could easily stay as a senior associate for a good amount of time, and maybe they might kick you out without having a CPA. So there are jobs out there that like any like tax job, maybe like a bookkeeping job that you could still do without having your CPA, but it is very limiting in your career, and you're gonna find out that it's gonna be more difficult to climb up the ladder without it. So just dedicate like 6 to 8 months, heads down, and just do it, I would say.
Yeah, and I know you're not necessarily haven't gone your CPA necessarily yet, and aren't necessarily in a public accounting role yet. But if somebody's wondering, about the pay range and the salaries, right, difference between having that CPA qualification, do you have an idea of what somebody would expect their pay increase to be, their salary ranges, and then as well as career progression, once they get their CPA? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, what that progression within roles as well as salary progression would look like?
Yeah, and I don't think there's a really concrete amount of like, "Hey, if you get your CPA, you're gonna make X amount of more." I think the Big 4 might offer, like I think they recently, increased their CPA bonus from 5,000 to 10,000. So that's a concrete amount. You're gonna get $10,000 if you're, like, at EY for getting your CPA. But getting your CPA helps you climb up that ladder, like I mentioned, and when you climb up, you get a promotion bonus, your salary will increase as well. So, it's not exactly one-to-one correlation that, okay, if you get your CPA, you're gonna make $5,000 more, but it does help you climb up the ladder, and because of that, you're gonna make more money if you're at a senior or director level.
Now, I want to ask you some questions regarding interviews, networking. In 2026, I feel like a few years ago, referrals was very important. If you had a referral, it was almost like a guaranteed way to get a phone call from a recruiter, to be able to maybe land an interview. Do you think referrals is still king in 2026? Or do you think the market, the companies are just too flooded with referrals and there has to be a new way to stand out?
Yeah, well, having a referral is better than not having one, so it definitely does still help, so I would still shoot to try to get one. But even if you have a referral, there might be 20 other people that got a referral at maybe like a for example, like my company recently just like posted our new grad finance rotation program, the one I'm in. We had over like 70 referrals. So you still have to find a way to differentiate yourself. That's not going to be the end all be all to get the job. So you have to figure out, okay, like what is your going to be your secret sauce? The referral might get you through the door, but it's you're not going to be partying all the way.
Now, if somebody's interviewing with a company, let's say they got their foot through the door, they're having interviews. I've always heard, and it's a common advice, that the interview is not necessarily for the interviewer asking you questions. You should ask them some questions. And that shows a long way of that you're interested, that you're thinking about their culture. Do you have any advice or question suggestions of what students should be asking? I feel like a lot of times students might just Google, hey, what questions should I ask a recruiter? And it might be too generic. Do you have any special tactic of creating the right type of questions to ask to stand out?
Yeah, and I think asking the right questions is a underlooked way to really stand out in your interviews. Typically, it's like the last thing that you guys will touch upon, but if you could end the interview with a great question, then it's just a cherry on top. But typically, one question that I like to ask is like if that company recently had like a recent M&A transaction, I might ask about that, show them I did my research on the company. So anything that will help my case to show them like I am very interested in this job position, I try to highlight that. So not necessarily me trying to ask about, okay, what are the next steps? What's the work-life balance? I'm trying to build my case up that I am the right candidate. I did my research.
Looking back at when your time at San Antonio College and then UC Berkeley, everything that you learned at San Antonio College, was there anything that stands out to you that you took away from there that Berkeley didn't necessarily teach you?
I would say my time at community college, it was the time where I really crafted my work ethic for specifically school. And if I wouldn't have done that, I probably wouldn't have been able to transfer to UC Berkeley. But secondly, I probably wouldn't have done well at UC Berkeley. So I even actually had to like up my the amount of work that I did at UC Berkeley rather than community college. But if it wasn't doing a complete 180 community college, then I mean, I probably would be in a completely different place. So, although like community college, it's probably you're not going to be like, your typical college experience of, going out. It's a very like solemn like period where you just have to like be very like introspective, figure out where you want to go. And also it's a great time as well to just like, well, you'll have so much free time to just like be at the gym, work a lot, focus on your grades. So you have a lot of free time for the first time in your life rather than like at high school where you have a set schedule. So it's a time period where you really start developing the habits that will take you long term and you could really decide where do you want to take your life.
Yeah, well said. Kind of building those foundations and the discipline in the beginning. Being in 2026, and we're in like a time where everything's transitioning with technology and AI. You might have a lot of coworkers that are older, right? Where do we call them like boomers, right? And I feel like it's a lot harder for them going through this transition too. We're at an age where we feel like we might be in the middle of it, but they're already older. They spend majority of their career, their time in the before these all these AI technology time. Is there any advice that you still hear or that boomers might be giving to people coming out of school that might actually be dangerous in 2026 and might be a bit outdated?
From what I'm seeing, I think a lot of the boomers are a bit too optimistic about AI. For any new technology that comes out, typically people like to like overhype it and its capabilities. But I would say like boomers, especially like the older generation, I think they might be a bit too bullish on AI, which might be like a contrary opinion. Like you would think like the younger generation might be. But I feel like it's typically the younger generation that kinda has their feet in the water with, like, using these AI tools, and we understand the limitations that it has. So, I feel like that's the difference between, like, an older generation, their opinion on AI versus, like, the people that are actually in the weeds of things. We kinda know that it's limited to, like, whatever the models are limited.
You've also I heard you say that the job market is a lottery, and I feel like the more competitive that it becomes, that saying is becoming more and more, it makes more and more sense. Now, if it is a lottery, how do you buy more tickets without burning out? What's the one key? I know earlier too you mentioned that, or maybe I saw it in one of your videos that at your company, they put out a job posting, there's 500 to 6, 700 applications within 24 hours, 36 hours. How do you get through that lottery system and have the winning lottery ticket?
Yeah, if you go on your phone and the number one app that your screen time is pointing to is not LinkedIn, then you're not trying to win the lottery. You have to be consistently on LinkedIn every day at the minimum, every other hour. You have to be scrolling and seeing when these jobs are being posted because a lot of these jobs are on a first come, first serve basis, on a rolling basis. So you want to make sure that you're getting in your lottery ticket, so you have to be on LinkedIn more than TikTok, more than Instagram. You have to be absolutely just scrolling on LinkedIn all the time.
Yeah, it's almost like you said, it's a numbers game. Now, on to my last question. Combining everything that we've talked about, right, into one sentence, one advice. If there is a student right now listening and you could just combine everything into one advice for them to have a successful career path ahead, what would that be?
Get comfortable doing uncomfortable things. There's something called the AMCC where it's like, it's almost like a muscle in your brain where if you get more comfortable doing things that you don't want to do, you start craving that thing and you actually start being able to like withstand those things. And you actually, it kind of coincides with like consistency and discipline. Once you kind of reach that top peak, it actually things get easier. So start doing the things that make you uncomfortable. If you don't like doing public speaking, do public speaking events. Force yourself into these uncomfortable positions. It will only help you in your career, yourself as a human. So start doing the uncomfortable things that you don't want to do. Start challenging yourself today on those things.
Yeah, well said. Building everything early. Adam, thank you so much for being on Career Tea today. Thank you for being transparent and thank you for giving me your time answering so many different questions. I feel like we dove into a lot of different internships, careers, and you gave a lot of good advice. Especially being a few years out of college. I feel like you can relate, or students can relate to you a lot and potentially take a lot of advice from you. Maybe there's community college students or students that want to get into Berkeley, and I feel like you've kind of paved the perfect path for them. For anybody that's listening, I'm sure they can also come to your pages. I know you have resume templates, you have transfer roadmaps for them. So I will tag your socials below as well, because you have a lot of good content to give to them. So thank you for being here today. It was a pleasure, and I hope to have you back on Career Tea again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.